The rope sliced through Delphine's wrists as she thrashed against the oak tree, 3 men circling her like vultures around carrion. Blood trickled from her split lip where Hutchins had struck her for spitting in his face. "Should have minded your own business, half-breed," Hutchins sneered, adjusting his grip on the branding iron heating in the makeshift fire. "Telling folks about our cattle rustling was your first mistake. Being born was your second." Delphine's violet eyes blazed with defiance despite her predicament. At 19, she possessed an ethereal beauty that made grown men stumble over their words' honey-colored skin, raven-black hair that caught sunlight like silk, and a spirit that burned fiercer than prairie fire. Her mixed heritage showed in her high cheekbones and the proud way she carried herself, even now bound and bleeding. "My father will come for me," she whispered through cracked lips. Hutchins laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Your pa? That old Indian disappeared into the mountains years ago. Probably dead and picked clean by now." What they didn't know was that Tobias Nighthawk still lived, and at 6 feet 8 inches with shoulders broad enough to block doorways, the Comanche warrior had never forgotten his daughter or the white woman who'd given her life, bringing Delphine into the world. Hidden in the pine-shrouded peaks, he'd watched over the settlement below, his keen eyes tracking every movement, every threat. The wind shifted, carrying Delphine's scent to the figure crouched on the ridgeline 300 yards away. Tobias had been tracking the rustlers for 2 days, following their lazy trail through the Badlands. When he'd seen them drag his daughter from her small cabin, something ancient and terrible had awakened in his chest. "Boss, maybe we should just run." "Her out of town," muttered Caleb, the youngest of the 3. His hand shook as he watched Hutchins test the iron's heat. "Killing her seems necessary," Hutchins cut him off. "She's seen too much, knows too much. Besides, who's gonna miss one half-breed girl?" As if summoned by those words, war cry split the morning air, a sound that hadn't been heard in these hills for 20 years. It rose and fell like thunder rolling across the valley, primal and terrifying. The horses reared and whinnied in panic. "What in hell?" Hutchins spun around, the branding iron wavering in his grip. From the tree line emerged a figure that belonged to legend rather than reality. Tobias Nighthawk moved with the fluid grace of a predator despite his massive frame. War paint streaked his weathered face in diagonal lines of red and black. His chest was bare except for the ancient bear claw necklace that marked him as a war chief. In his right hand, he carried a tomahawk that had tasted blood in a dozen battles. In his left, a rifle that had never missed its target, but it was his eyes that stopped the rustlers cold dark as winter nights, filled with the promise of swift and merciless death. "I'm coming," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing like distant thunder. The words were simple, quiet even, but they held the weight of an avalanche. Hutchins raised his rifle with trembling hands. "Stay back, you red devil." Tobias began to walk forward, unhurried, inevitable as sunrise. Behind him, the forest seemed to hold its breath. The first shot cracked like a whip, Hutchins' bullet splintering bark inches from Tobias's shoulder. The giant Comanche didn't flinch, didn't break stride. He simply raised his own rifle and fired once. Hutchins screamed, clutching his shattered kneecap as he crumpled to the forest floor. His weapon spun away into the underbrush. "Jesus Christ!" Caleb scrambled for his pistol, but Tobias was already moving, covering the distance between them with impossible speed for a man his size. The tomahawk whistled through air, its flat side connecting with Caleb's skull. The young rustler dropped like a felled tree. Marcus, the third man, turned to run but found his path blocked by what seemed like a mountain of muscle and fury. Tobias seized him by the throat, lifting him clean off his feet with one massive hand. "Please," Marcus gasped, legs kicking uselessly in the air. "We didn't mean nothing by it." "You meant to murder my daughter." Tobias replied, his voice calm. As still water. With his free hand, he drew his knife a wicked curve of steel that had been his grandfather's before him. That means everything. Papa, no. Delphine's voice cut through the clearing. Even bound and bloodied, her tone carried authority that made her father pause. He's not worth it. None of them are worth damning your soul. Tobias looked into his daughter's eyes and saw her mother's mercy there, that gentle strength that had first captured his heart 20 years ago. Slowly, he lowered Marcus to the ground but kept his grip firm. Cut her loose, he commanded. Marcus stumbled to the tree, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the knife. When the ropes finally fell away, Delphine rubbed her raw wrists and walked to her father with dignity intact despite her ordeal. I knew you'd come, she whispered, touching his arm. You are my blood, Tobias said simply. My heart. I will always come. The moment of tenderness shattered as hoofbeats thundered through the forest. A dozen riders burst into the clearing. Led by a man Delphine recognized with a sinking heart, Jeremiah Wickham, the town's self-appointed sheriff and Hutchins' brother. There's the murdering savage, Wickham bellowed, leveling a shotgun at Tobias. Step away from him, girl, before he scalps you too. These men tried to kill me, Delphine said, positioning herself between the rifles and her father. My father saved my life. Your father's a red devil who's got no business on white man's land, Wickham spat. And you're nothing but his half-breed spawn. Should have run you both out years ago. Tobias studied the men surrounding them, 11 rifles against. His single weapon and his daughter caught in the middle. The odds were impossible, but he'd faced worse. During the war against the Bluecoats, he'd held off an entire cavalry unit with nothing but his tomahawk and his fury. Let her go, he said quietly. Your quarrel is with me. No quarrel, Wickham grinned, showing teeth stained brown with tobacco. Just cleaning up vermin. But as fingers tightened on triggers, another voice echoed through the trees. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Sheriff. From behind the posse emerged a man who made even Tobias look small, not in height, but in presence. Beaumont Cordwainer stood 6 feet tall with a kind of quiet confidence that came from facing death and walking away. His clothes marked him as a gentleman, but the twin colts on his hips told a different story. Silver-streaked hair framed. A face that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. Walk away, Cordwainer, Wickham snarled. This ain't your concern. Actually, Beaumont said, his drawl soft as silk over steel, it is. You see, the lady happens to be under my protection now. Delphine stared at the silver-haired stranger who just claimed her as his responsibility. She'd never seen him before. Yet something in his steady gray eyes suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. Protection? Wickham laughed harshly. From what authority? Beaumont reached into his coat with deliberate slowness, producing a leather wallet that caught the fa. Morning light. The badge inside gleamed like a fallen star Uju's marshal, with credentials signed by the territorial governor himself. Federal authority, Sheriff Wickham. I've been tracking a cattle rustling operation across 3 territories. Your brother and his men just happened to be the ringleaders I was hunting. His gaze swept over the injured Hutchins, still groaning on the ground. Seems like justice caught up with them before I could. Wickham's face darkened. Like a storm cloud. That's a lie. My brother's an honest rancher. Your brother's a thief and a would-be murderer, Beaumont replied evenly. The young lady here witnessed them stealing Senator Morrison's prize bulls last Tuesday. When she tried to report it, they decided to silence her permanently. He gestured toward the still glowing branding iron. Permanently and painfully, it seems. Tobias stepped forward, his massive frame casting shadows over the clearing. Why do you help us, lawman? Beaumont met the Comanche's dark eyes without flinching. Because what's right is right, regardless of color or blood. And because I knew your woman, Tobias Nighthawk." The name hung in the air like a prayer. Tobias's hand tightened on his tomahawk handle. "You knew Melody?" "Melody Rousseau was my cousin," Beaumont said quietly. "I was supposed to escort her west, to marry some banker in Denver. Instead, she met a Comanche warrior at a trading post and fell in love. When she chose to stay with you, her family disowned her. I was the only one who understood why." Delphine felt tears prick her eyes. Her mother had spoken often of a cousin who'd supported her choice to follow her heart, even when the rest of the world turned its back. She'd never expected to meet him. "Melody died giving birth to our daughter," Tobias said, pain roughening his voice. "I could not save her." "But you saved what mattered most to her," Beaumont replied, looking at Delphine. "You raised her daughter with love and honor. Melody would be proud." Wickham spat into the dirt, his patience exhausted. "This is all very touching, but I've got a town to protect from savages. Stand aside, Marshal, or be branded a savage lover yourself." The threat was barely out of his mouth before Beaumont's right-hand Colt appeared as if by magic. Its barrel centered on Wickham's chest. His draw had been faster than thought, smoother than water. "I am many things, Sheriff," Beaumont said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "But savage isn't one of them. Unlike some folks, I don't try to burn young women with branding. Irons." The posse shifted nervously, suddenly aware they were caught between a federal marshal who just demonstrated lightning reflexes and a Comanche warrior who looked capable of tearing them all apart with his bare hands. "Now," Beaumont continued, never wavering his aim, "I suggest you collect your wounded and return to town. Tell everyone that Delphine Nighthawk is under federal protection while she serves as a key witness in my rustling investigation. This ain't over," Wickham snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "No," Tobias said quietly, "it is not." As the posse retreated with their wounded, carrying the unconscious Caleb and the groaning Hutchins, Delphine found herself alone. With two men who represented completely different worlds, her Comanche father and her mother's Southern gentleman cousin. "Thank you," she said to Beaumont, "but I don't understand." "Why now? Why are you here?" Beaumont holstered his weapon and smiled, transforming his weathered face. "Because I made your mother a promise 20 years ago. I told her that if her daughter ever needed family, she'd have it." 3 days later, Delphine sat on the porch of Beaumont's temporary lodgings, watching her father teach her cousin the finer points of tracking. Despite their different backgrounds, the two men had formed an unlikely partnership based on mutual respect and shared concern for her safety. "The bent grass tells you direction," Tobias explained, kneeling beside a barely visible trail. "The depth tells you weight. The spacing tells you speed." Beaumont nodded, absorbing every word. "In all my years of law work, I never learned to read sign like this. White men look with their eyes," Tobias replied. "Comanche look with their souls." Their camaraderie might have warmed Delphine's heart under different circumstances, but she could feel the tension building in town like pressure before a storm. Wickham hadn't been idle since their confrontation. He'd been spreading poison, turning neighbor against neighbor with talk of Indian uprisings and half-breed conspiracies. "They're planning something," she said as the men joined her on the porch. "Mrs. Henley wouldn't even look at me at the general store yesterday. And old Peterson actually crossed the street to avoid me." Beaumont's jaw tightened. "Wickham's been busy. He's calling for a town meeting tonight, says he's got proof that your father's been raiding homesteads." "What proof?" Tobias asked, though. His tone suggested he already knew the answer. "The kind that gets manufactured when the truth isn't convenient enough," Beaumont replied grimly. "I've seen it before. Planted evidence, coerced testimony, mob justice disguised as law and order. Delphine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. We should leave. Tonight, before the meeting. Head for the territorial capital where you can get help. Running solves nothing, Tobias said quietly. They will follow. They will never stop following. Your father's right, Beaumont agreed. Besides, I didn't spend 20 years wearing a badge just to run from men like Wickham. As if summoned. By their conversation, the sound of approaching horses drifted up from the valley. But these weren't the heavy, plodding mounts of townspeople. These horses moved with the controlled gait of military cavalry. A troop of 12 soldiers crested the hill, their blue uniforms and polished brass marking them as regular army. At their head rode a young officer whose bearing suggested both competence and compassion. Marshal Cordwainer? The lieutenant dismounted with practiced ease. I'm Lieutenant Donovan Pierce, ordered here by Colonel Matthews to provide assistance with your federal investigation. Beaumont stood, extending his hand. Timely arrival. Lieutenant, what prompted the colonel to send support? Received reports of potential Indian troubles in the area, Pierce replied, then paused as he noticed Tobias. The young officer studied the massive Comanche for a long moment before continuing. Though, from what I've been told, the troubles might not be coming from the direction some folks expect. Delphine watched the exchange with growing hope. Lieutenant Pierce had intelligent brown eyes and an honest face unmarked by the prejudice. She'd grown accustomed to seeing. When he removed his hat and nodded respectfully to her, she felt her cheeks warm. Ma'am, he said simply, I understand you've been through quite an ordeal. Thank you, Lieutenant. Your timing is fortuitous. Pierce smiled, and Delphine felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. The colonel said, U.S. to ensure justice is served fairly, ma'am. That's exactly what we intend to do. From the valley below, church bells began to toll, calling the townspeople to Wickham's meeting. But now, instead of facing mob justice alone, Delphine found herself protected by federal authority and military might. More importantly, she found herself stealing glances at a young cavalry officer whose presence made her forget, for brief moments, about rustlers and sheriffs and the weight of being caught between two worlds. The real battle begins now, Beaumont said quietly, watching smoke rise from the town's gathering places. Tobias nodded, his weathered hand resting on his tomahawk. Let them come. We are ready. But Delphine barely heard them. She was too busy, wondering if her fluttering heart meant she was ready for an entirely different kind of battle altogether.